Some horror movies feel different when you watch them alone. They're not louder, not scarier. They're just closer. And Hereditary is one of those movies. Everyone calls Hereditary one of the greatest horror movies ever made. And honestly, I want to agree. The performances are incredible. The atmosphere is suffocating. There are moments in this movie that genuinely stay with you. But the longer I sat with it, the more something started to bother me. Because the more I looked at what actually happens in this story, the less it feels like a story about people at all. Hello everyone, my name is Falcon and welcome to What Am I Watching? Turn off the lights and stay a while. Let's learn a few things together, shall we? Because Hereditary feels a lot less like a psychological horror when you really think about it. I honestly don't think it is at all, and that changes the entire experience of the film. Without getting too deep into spoilers just yet, Hereditary presents itself as a story about grief. A family loses someone, and what follows isn't just sadness, it's deterioration, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. You watch this family slowly fall apart under the weight of trauma, and for a while, it feels painfully human. That's why this movie works so well initially, because underneath all that disturbing imagery, it feels grounded, recognizable, like something that could happen. Not the supernatural elements necessarily, but the emotional collapse underneath them. And all that emotional realism is what pulls people in. Take Toni Colletti's performance. There's that dinner scene. Oh, that dinner scene. Where everything finally spills out. There's no dramatic music, no exaggerated editing. There's just anger, exhaustion, and resentment. And what makes it uncomfortable isn't the yelling, it's the honesty. It feels less like a scripted horror scene and more like we're walking into the middle of a real family breaking apart. And visually, the film constantly reinforces that feeling. The house often looks like one of Annie's miniatures. Characters framed like objects being positioned. Rooms feeling artificial or controlled, like everything is being observed from a distance. Even the quiet scenes feel wrong. Someone sitting in a dark room, a hallway at night, nothing moving. And yet the movie somehow creates this constant pressure, like something is already there, waiting. And for most of the film, that tension works because the movie allows ambiguity. You can interpret what's happening psychologically. You can still believe that these people are collapsing under grief. That what we're seeing may be a distorted reality, distorted by trauma. And honestly, that's where I think Hereditary is at its strongest. Not when it becomes supernatural, but when it feels uncertain. But then something changes. And the strange part is, it doesn't happen during one of those huge moments. It happens quietly. There's a scene where Annie is working. She's painting, and one of the paint bottles moves. It's subtle, easy to overlook, but it matters. Because from that moment forward, the movie stops asking whether something is supernatural or not. It's telling you, directly, dictating. Something external is interacting with this world, and for me that changes everything, because ambiguity disappears. And once ambiguity disappears, the psychological horror starts to disappear with it. You're no longer watching people interpret trauma. You're watching something act on them, and that's completely different. A very different kind of fear. And what's frustrating is, some of the movie's strongest scenes happen right before that shift fully takes over. The night drive, the silence, headlights cutting through the darkness. There's no music, no release, just tension. And then impact. It's horrifying because it feels accidental, real, not cinematic. And the aftermath? That's probably the most effective scene in the entire film. Peter, sitting silently, driving home, then going upstairs, lying in bed, The camera refuses to leave him alone. That's horror rooted in human emotion. Not spectacle, not mythology, just shock, guilt, emotional paralysis. And for a moment the film feels devastating, because it feels close. Now, when I rewatched this movie, I kept thinking about Pan's Labyrinth. A strange choice of movies to start thinking about while watching Hereditary, I know. But it's because both films ask a familiar question. Is this supernatural, or is this psychological? But the difference is, Pan's Labyrinth understands the power of uncertainty. Depending on who you ask, the fantasy in that movie is either completely real or entirely happening inside of Ophelia's mind as a way of coping with trauma. And the film protects that ambiguity almost all the way to the end. Even now, people still debate it. Because the movie understands something important. The moment you fully explain the impossible, part of the tension disappears along with it. Part of the audience participation disappears with it. You stop interpreting, and you only start observing. And Hereditary crosses that line surprisingly early. After a certain point, there's no real question anymore, no uncertainty. There's no psychological interpretation left to wrestle with. The movie quietly shifts from, is this grief destroying a family, to, nope, this was always happening. And once you notice that, the entire structure changes. Not knowing whether something is truly there or whether we slowly convinced ourselves it was. And this is where the movie really started to lose me. Because once the supernatural structure becomes clear, the characters all slowly start to lose their agency. Think about Annie. At first, she feels emotionally complex. She's messy, human. But the deeper the movie goes, the less her choices actually matter. The same thing happens with Peter. Things happen around him. They happen through him or towards him, but very rarely because of him. And that's important. Because in most psychological horror, characters fight against what's happening. Even if they fail, they resist. They fight. Their decisions matter. But in Hereditary, it increasingly feels like every path was already decided long before the story even began. The characters are not navigating chaos. They're moving through a structure, a mechanism, clockwork. And once the film becomes about external inevitability instead of human struggle, it starts to create emotional distance. And honestly, this is something I struggle with a lot with A24 films. And before anyone gets angry, I actually really like A24. I think when it comes to atmosphere, cinematography, sound design, performances, they're one of the most interesting studios working right now. Their films feel deliberate, carefully constructed, almost hypnotic sometimes. But my God, their storytelling. That's where things become inconsistent for me. Because there are times when I walk away from one of these movies feeling less like I just experienced a story, and more like I stood in front of an incredibly beautiful painting. Something that was technically impressive, carefully designed, but emotionally distant. It wasn't there. Almost like the film was more interested in creating the feeling of depth, rather than earning it through the characters themselves. And hey, maybe that sounds harsh, but I think that's why movies like Hereditary become so divisive once the initial shock fades. Because the craftsmanship is undeniable. The atmosphere, it's undeniable. But the emotional experience underneath it, it becomes harder to hold on to once you realize how little control the characters actually had, how much their choices mattered, how much what they're going through actually mattered. You start to stop caring about them, about their struggles, about what they're going through. Now, I'm not saying I dislike all of A24's stories. It's a flip of a coin, really. Give me heads, give me tails. I love some of them, and I really hate others. But they all look beautiful. But the way the movie changes so early on, hey, maybe that's why the movie works for so many people. That inevitability, the complete lack of control, maybe that's real horror to some of you. The idea that some people are simply trapped inside of a structure that they never chose. But for me, the horror that stays with me has always been more human than that. It's the feeling that things could have gone differently, that someone could have made another choice, that tragedy wasn't guaranteed. You see, that's the kind of horror that follows me home. Not because it's bigger than life, but because it feels dangerously close to it. And that, my friends, that's why I don't think Hereditary is a real psychological horror film. At least not for very long. Because eventually, the movie stops being about people's emotional collapse under grief, and it becomes about people being moved towards an outcome that was already decided from the beginning. And once you see that, it becomes difficult to experience the movie the same way again. But let me know in the comments below. Did we misunderstand Hereditary? Or is this exactly what makes it work? I want to thank you all for staying as long as you did. If you made it this far, I must be doing something that you like. So if you enjoy this kind of horror, consider subscribing. Because this channel, well, it's one of those stories. It doesn't just end. It sits with you. We talk about things that are worth talking about. And maybe we learn something together along the way. Thank you all for listening tonight, and I hope to see you in the next video.